welcome back to another special episode of Queen's Law Pod, the podcast that dives into the people, pathways and pivotal moments shaping the legal profession in Northern Ireland and beyond. I'm Taylor Montgomery, your host for today's episode, and I'm delighted to be joined by Philip Armstrong.
Hi Taylor, lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming here today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Philip Armstrong. I am a solicitor and I'm the founder of Armstrong Solicitors. We're a high street firm based in Glengormley, just outside Belfast. We deal with most areas of law. And as well as that then, I am a member of the Council of the Law Society of Northern Ireland, and I'm also chair of the Conveyancing and Property Committee.
Well, first off, thank you so much for being here again. Thank you for joining me. I just want to begin. Could you please tell us a bit about your early career and what first inspired you to enter the legal field?
Okay, first thing to say is that I don't have any family members who were in the law, which I think is important to point out, because I think there's sometimes a perception that law can be quite traditional and it's always family firms.
Yes.
That certainly wasn't the case for me. We had no lawyers in our immediate family. I went to primary school beside Rathcoole Estate, Abbots Cross Primary School, went to Belfast Inst and then came here to do my law degree. I think it's also probably worth pointing out that I just scraped in here, having not done as well in my A-levels as I had hoped to, and I did in my mocks. And for the first 2 weeks preceding coming to Queen's, I had actually enrolled to start redoing some of my A-levels
Oh, wow.
in one of the colleges in Belfast. And then someone dropped out of Queen's and I got in here. So that was a real incentive for me to work incredibly hard all the way through. So came here. I think I was the first year to do the 3-year modular course as opposed to the older 4-year course where you did finals at the end. So came here. I did work experience in a couple of different firms and types of firms for those early years. Last couple of years in school and then throughout university. So I did work experience in a law department in a public body. I did work experience in a corporate firm in Belfast. And then I did work experience in 3 high street firms, one on the Newton Ards Road, one in Dromore, and then another one in Antrim. And looking at those different things and looking for where I wanted to do my apprenticeship, I wasn't sure what area of law that I wanted to go into at that point. So I felt if I went towards a high street firm, I would probably find an area of law that I liked. I think certainly when I was at that age, if you went into a corporate firm, you went to where there was a place and you might have ended up pigeonholed somewhere where you didn't necessarily want to be. So I actually did my apprenticeship with GIH Lockhart in Antrim. I knew Alan, my master, through tennis. We played in the same tennis club. And now this is going to sound incredibly shallow, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And he had a Lotus and he had a Jaguar. And I thought, well, that looks like a well-paid job and you don't have to be involved with bodily fluids.
Exactly.
Unlike if you're going to be a doctor or something like that. So doing work experience, I decided, you know what, I love the law. I suppose looking back, and I know a lot of people have a sort of a pivotal moment where they say, I want to help people or, I want to fight injustice. To be brutally honest, that wasn't necessarily my sort of road to Damascus conversion. I simply was always curious and I wanted to always find out more about things. And if you're curious about how the world works, law is where you need to be because law is essentially the glue that holds society together. So as I say, I had no crusading zeal necessarily to go into law. But when I started my apprenticeship and saw all aspects of law, and again, as an apprentice in Antrim, I did quite a lot of family law and matrimonial work, did some criminal law, did some claims, did some property law, which I actually didn't particularly like at that point.
Oh, no.
Did some wills and probate. Yeah, I know the irony isn't lost on me. But first and foremost, what I realised is this isn't about law, it's about people. And people come to a solicitor with literally 1 or 2 exceptions. They come to a solicitor, and especially a high street solicitor, at the worst possible time in their lives,
That's
whether
true.
that is because they've been victims of domestic violence or domestic abuse, whether they have lost someone and they need to administer their estate, whether, sometimes when people move house, it's because they're downsizing, because they've been widowed. There are so many reasons why people need access and recourse to the law. And that was suddenly my road to Damascus conversion moment where I said, hold on, I actually want to help these people. You learn a bit about their lives. And at the end of it, and again, when I come to the end of my career, I turned 50 last month. So a lot of my career is behind me. It won't be the money or anything like that I look back on with pride. It'll be the number of people and the kind of people that I've actually helped at the worst possible time in their lives. And that's something that I think you get in the high street firm, which certainly in my experience, you don't get in a corporate firm or other law firms sort of outside of the high street.
Oh, that's amazing. And I mean, even before that, did you know that you wanted to be a solicitor? Was that the route that you'd chosen during your undergrad?
Yes, by the time I went to undergrad, and again, to be brutally honest, when I was at school, being in sort of school in the centre of Belfast, we were encouraged to sort of go towards Oxbridge, Oxford or Cambridge. But I know if I wanted to practice law in Northern Ireland, I needed to do law at Queen's, essentially.
Yes.
There weren't a lot of other options at that point. So I always wanted to come here. So certainly by the time I went to undergraduate, yeah, absolutely, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, and I'd done work experience at that point, and I absolutely knew what I wanted to do. I didn't know what area of law, but I absolutely knew that I wanted to get into the law in some shape.
And do you think going into the apprenticeships, do you think that helped you go towards property law, or what was the moment that you thought, no, this is for me?
The property law side of things? Oh, well, that's another story. So I spent, after qualifying in Antrim, I spent about a year there and wasn't as keen on being the sort of the junior solicitor. I was doing lots of areas of law that I didn't like. And to be brutally honest, I think some of those earlier cases, and especially in the family law and on the domestic abuse side of things, I'm not sure I was actually emotionally mature enough to deal with it. So I wasn't as keen on that. So a job came up in a high street firm in Hollywood for a claims solicitor. And don't worry, I'm getting to the conveyancing bit. And I went for that and I was successful.
Amazing.
And then one of the lovely legal secretaries in there and I started going out together. And she, 2 years later, was headhunted back to a previous firm that she'd worked for. At that point, she and I were engaged. And she said, well, I'll come back, but I'm engaged to a claims solicitor. And they sort of said, well, okay, we'll take him as well. So Joanne, my now wife, and I went to work together. Well, we went to work in the same law firm in Newton Ards. We were then offered the role of running one of their branch offices, which had been sort of part-time, and they wanted to see if it was viable full-time. So Joanne was an incredible conveyancing secretary, to the point really she ran a huge amount of the cases. She'd been taught by some of the best conveyancers in Northern Ireland over the years. So when we went and opened full-time the Cumber sub-office of this law firm, I did claims and she taught me how to do conveyancing. And then suddenly it just clicked and I thought, I absolutely love this. And because I'm interested in local history and things like that, when you start to look at title deeds, you start to see the history of stuff in title deeds. And actually just recently I saw a set of title deeds for a property in Main Street in Larne. And the title deeds went back to 1730.
Wow.
Which was in living memory of the Battle of the Boyne.
Oh my goodness.
Which is just insane. So you see history in the title deeds. And as I say, if you're interested in history, conveyancing is almost like an extension of a hobby because you can go into that level of detail. So very quickly, to continue on with my long career path, Joanne and I went back to the main office, having shown it could work. I was made a partner, but to be brutally honest, and again, benefit of hindsight and some self-criticism, I probably wasn't cut out to be employed. I felt that if my ideas weren't taken on board, I get very annoyed and impatient and grumpy and all the things that now as an employer, I look at people who do that and think, gosh, you're an absolute dose. But now I can think, well, hold on a minute, you have a point. So anyway, it was suggested to me that I might like to look at law outside of that particular firm, if I could put it that way. And in 2005 we did. We walked away and I started up self-employed in June 2005 with a friend from university here in Donegal Pass, just down the street. And we worked together in that for 2 years, and that was literally from scratch. And it was terrifying. We had zero money. We had lots of ideas and no resources whatsoever to implement them. Long story short, the partnership came to an end when he decided to move away from that career. Excuse me. And at that point then, I went into partnership with someone else to do specialised volume remortgaging work for one of the mortgage lenders panels in England. You may or may not own a house at this point, but when people own a house and they have a mortgage, they generally remortgage every couple of years. And one of the things that mortgage lenders will do is say, if you go with us, you can remortgage and there's free legal fees, and then they get a nominated law firm to do that work. So I went into partnership with someone else to do this work specifically. And 2007 is when we started. 2008, we had the massive property crash. And then early in 2009, we were kicked off the panel because there wasn't the work. And frankly, at that point, the firm was like two bald men fighting over a comb because there was literally no work. So we decided to go our own separate ways. I was brought up in the Newton Abbey area. There was a new unit sitting vacant beside literally where I used to get off the bus from school on the way home in Monkstown. And essentially, Joanne and I started from scratch with no work. We had just us, a claims and family law solicitor, an office junior, and 800 square feet. We had to get a second mortgage on our property to fund it. We were in so much debt from the previous firm, and we had a set of projections, and the bank were really tough on us and said, you have got to stick with these projections. And absolutely bizarrely, at the end of the third year, we were literally within £10 of the projections.
Oh my goodness.
And that wasn't to do with any of the skill or anything like that. It just so happened because they sort of, the figures and the finances went up and down. But somehow at the end of those 3-year projections, we sort of hit where we wanted to be.
And I mean, what was that first month like? You're in your own law firm and now it's your business.
Yeah, it almost felt to me as if the previous two law firms that I was an owner of and a partner in, they didn't feel completely mine because I was a sort of a 50% owner. 2009, Armstrong Solicitors started, and that was literally us. It was almost the last throw of the dice, to be brutally honest. Other than that, I was going to have to go and be employed somewhere and sort of hang my head in shame and be a failed business person. So there was an interesting feeling of, and a huge sense of pride, actually, in the fact that this was ours and we had a lot more control over it, because when we're I know the bank were sort of owning us at that point, but we did have control over our own destiny. So it was exciting and terrifying. In terms of how we got working, that was incredibly difficult, but I did something in 2009, which most solicitors never did, which is actually go out and speak to people.
Amazing.
Because the traditional solicitor sits in their office and the work comes to them.
Yes.
Well, if you start a firm from scratch and you don't have any repeat business and you don't have long-standing families with wills sitting for X number of years, you have to go out and get the work in. And I've always said, because we sort of started in the middle of a recession and we started essentially a property law firm in the middle of a recession, we've always fought for the work. And even when we're now more successful, we're still fighting for the work. And I've never for a single day been complacent, because as soon as you're complacent, someone comes and eats your lunch.
That's amazing. It's really inspiring to hear how many times, I mean, you still got back up and...
Yeah, do you know what? Again, because I am not complacent, I sort of feel that's what we had to do. I suppose, 2009 we opened 800 square feet. We did well, we did okay. Believe it or believe it not, I got a lot of work and exposure in from going out and talking to local groups about the Titanic. In my other life, I was a committee member and I was also past chair of the Belfast Titanic Society. So I actually went out and gave talks to diabetes groups, women's groups, Presbyterian Women's Association, Mothers Union about the Titanic. And that got me out into the sort of community, and it meant that then when the local community were walking past our door, they said, that's that guy. And we actually got work from that. very long story short, 5 years later, 2009, we started. It was difficult. There's no two ways about that, and there were a lot of challenges along the way. The first month was exciting until we realised then that we couldn't actually pay for anything. Second month, which you haven't asked about, not quite so exciting, but with a lot of peaks and troughs, we did okay. And in 2014, we'd sort of got to the point that we'd outgrown the office and we were looking for new premises. And we were looking towards Glengormley because it was a much wider demographic and a more diverse demographic. And again, you learn about business very early on as well when you're running your own firm. So we bought the old Northern Bank building, which had recently closed in Glengormley. And again, for title deeds, we had the big bank vault. And being a control freak, I sort of designed the interior for what I wanted it to be.
That's perfect.
But I very much wanted to think about it from the customer experience or the client experience. So I wanted to think, what is the client going to expect when they walk through the door?
Yes.
You know, they want it to be nice and bright and airy and modern and clean. They don't want to see files sitting all around the place. If they come to a consultation room, they don't want it to be in a solicitor's office with files all sort of piled around the place. They just want to be me, my file and the solicitor. So all our meeting rooms have round tables because it's not a them and us thing. We're all sitting around the same table. We have air conditioning in all our meeting rooms. We have monitors so that we can plug our computers in. We have conference phones. And when people came to see us, they got a really modern experience. I sort of thought that's the way law firms were going. But when other colleagues have come in and other people who have been in other law firms have come in, they're amazed at how modern and sort of new and accessible our law firm is. And the other thing that I wanted to do was I didn't want solicitors sitting in offices.
Yes.
I wanted solicitors to be in the midst of the main room with everyone else. And we still sit in the main room beside our assistants. And I sit opposite my co-director and beside me is Joanne, my wife, assistant, boss. But we all sit beside our assistants and none of our conveyancers sit separately. We all sit in one room. So we have a lot of support. We give each other, there's a lot of banter as well.
I can imagine.
There's a lot of banter and you can see some of that on our social media. But the idea that everyone is actually working together, and you asked me at the start of this whether you call me Philip or Mr. Armstrong. Nobody calls me Mr. Armstrong. That's the way that we run our firm.
And do you think that's helped the success of your law firm,
yes.
that collaboration?
Yeah, 100%. For a number of reasons. I've always said, and again, as chair of the Conveyancing and Property Committee, I have the dubious honour of standing in Titanic Belfast every year at an annual conveyancing conference, speaking to my 400 conveyancing colleagues / competitors. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I've always said is it's incredibly difficult to be a property law solicitor. And if you're a sole principal, if you're the only solicitor in your firm and you're doing that, it's incredibly lonely. Or if you're the only conveyancing solicitor in a firm, it's incredibly lonely because you're always second guessing yourself. There's so much information that you need to be aware of. In our firm, we have 4 conveyancing solicitors in one room. So literally on tap, by just shouting out, we have a second opinion, a third opinion, a fourth opinion.
Perfect.
And I know people who have come to work for us initially just can't get their head around the fact that they don't have an office. And then immediately just love it because they get to know each other better as well. That's the other thing. But yeah, the atmosphere is brilliant and it's incredibly supportive. And I have to say, I haven't always loved. There's been times in my career, Taylor, where I haven't loved coming into work in my own law firm for various reasons. At the minute, I cannot wait to get in because it's just so good.
Oh, that's amazing. And I just wanted to ask you as well, as a strong advocate for high street law firms, what do you think is the future of the smaller firms, in this new legal landscape? And it's increasingly dominated by larger companies in like corporate Belfast.
That's a really good question. I think you could almost do an entire season on this.
Probably.
Statistically speaking, most solicitors, there's around about 2,200 qualified solicitors in private practice in Northern Ireland, but the vast majority are in this greater Belfast area. But the majority of law firms are outside of the greater Belfast area.
Yes.
So that means that most law firms outside of Belfast or our cities are actually pretty small. And I think there's a number of challenges for that. First of all, that actually comes from the Troubles, where people didn't want to travel to another town to see a lawyer. They much preferred to stay in their own community. And that's why we have so many historically, that's why we have so many small law firms. The difficulty with small law firms at the moment is every single area of law is changing so much, so quickly. I literally just do property law and nothing else. I am immersed in it and I struggle to keep up to date with everything that's happening. If you are a sole practitioner, almost like a GP who is doing a bit of everything, it's almost impossible to keep up with that. So the challenge of that, and the challenge of being able to pay for running a practice, and the challenge of dealing with regulation, because there's a lot more regulatory stuff. The list of do's and don'ts for lawyers,
Yeah, I can imagine.
it just continues to increase. So we need high street law firms more than ever. But I think you will see more law firms need to specialise. They probably need to merge, where you will have an expert in criminal law sitting down beside an expert in conveyancing, beside an expert in claims, beside an expert in wills. And together, those 4 solicitors will bring an incredible service to the local community. But I think being a very small law firm with only 1 or 2 solicitors, I think is a very difficult challenge.
So, as we were mentioning, the corporate companies are more international. What do you think stands out practicing law in Northern Ireland as opposed to London?
Well, I think first of all, we need to define what you mean by corporate companies. There are the sort of the Belfast city centre firms who have always been Belfast city centre firms. And then we have the ones who are sort of the back office firms.
Maybe the back office ones.
Well, quite clearly, the attraction for them coming to Northern Ireland is the fact that our graduates are so damn good and they scoop up the best and the brightest. And that is actually one of the huge challenges for high street law firms.
Yes.
Because those younger people are completely lost to their local communities. And I think that is entirely to the detriment of the Northern Ireland community across the board. So yeah, the attraction is it's cheaper. They still offer phenomenal packages that high street law firms probably can't initially offer. And they just take the best and the brightest. And the fact is the Northern Ireland education system is excellent, and the law graduates who come out from Queen's and University of Ulster are exceptional. So yeah, of course they would gravitate over here.
And in your opinion, what stands out for the high street law firm for people that are trying to weigh up their options between an apprenticeship or a traineeship in Belfast?
Right, that's a really good question. There are a couple of things. First of all, if you are ambitious and you really want to be in a law firm, the opportunities for you to move through the ranks are now vast because there are so few young lawyers going into high street law firms. So if you're good and if you're in the right firm, they will see your potential and they will push you through. So you will be senior and probably part of management much quicker than you would ever be in a much larger corporate firm, whether that's Belfast City Centre or whether it's down in Titanic Quarter, Clarendon Dock direction. So the chance for promotion and advancement is absolutely vast. But I think the other thing is, if you're interested in your local community, if you're a member of organisations and sports clubs and things like that, and you take an interest in your local community, you can give back to it. But I can tell you there's nothing better than walking down the street in Glengormley or in the surrounding area and seeing people that you've actually helped and them seeing you. And as I say, if you want to actually help people, I just don't see the direct correlation in a corporate law firm. Yes, you're hitting targets and you're helping businesses and they're achieving wonderful things. Don't get me wrong. We need corporate life. But in terms of actually helping your people on your doorstep, a high street law firm is the only place you can do that.
And you specialise in residential law specifically. Would you be able to walk us through what that involves in a high street law firm and what clients often misunderstand about conveyancing?
Oh, there's another season. Okay, well, to start at the beginning, conveyancing is obviously simply the legal transfer of ownership from one person, the seller, to another person, the buyer. Residential conveyancing, moving house in Northern Ireland, is carried out under the Law Society's Home Charter Scheme, which is a list of essentially do's and don'ts for what solicitors have to provide, what information, what documentation we have to deal with. And it's an awful lot more than that as well. One of the main challenges we have is people don't see the legal process as central to the process of moving house. But moving house is a legal process first and foremost.
Yes.
So one of our big jobs is communication, and especially expectation management, because we will have clients who come to us, and despite the fact there may be all sorts of issues with the legal stuff involved with moving house, they will say, I have to move on this date because I've ordered a suite from DFS, my fridge is coming from Curry's, Sky are coming to do my install. And you go, no, hold on a minute, you've got the cart before the horse. We tell you when you're going to get your stuff delivered.
Exactly.
Because we tell you when this is correct. This is the biggest financial transaction of your life. And so that's one of our main challenges. And if you're asking me what the main thing that clients maybe don't understand, it is that this is a legal process and it's actually led by the solicitor.
No, that is fascinating. And what you said about, ordering in your electricity and everything, getting your Sky set up, I can see how that would cause some issues.
We actually have, I developed a conveyancing web app, and one of the notifications we actually send to our purchasers in particular says, do not get your collection or your delivery from any of your suppliers until we tell you.
That's a good notification.
Yeah.
And I mean,
they ignore it, but yeah.
What inspired you to set up that app? I know you're very into your technology.
What inspired me to set up the app is, frankly, the fact that traditionally solicitors aren't seen as good communicators. Now that seems ridiculous because when you see them on TV and in movies and you see them in court on their hind legs, they look like incredible communicators with charisma and what have you. But generally speaking, traditional solicitors aren't seen as being very communicative. And unfortunately, at times, our high street law firms are seen as not being good at returning calls, engaging with people. There's a huge amount of things that people need to understand when they're moving house. Some of the stuff we are required as solicitors to tell them. Other stuff, and more important stuff, is the stuff that they just need to know. And for me to sit in an interview with them for 2 hours going through it all, they would just simply never take it in. So I felt the best way of getting this information over to people is in bite-sized chunks in the comfort of their own home. So I developed the conveyancing web app. Initially, they can go onto our website. Anyone can go onto our website and they can get an instant fee quote on how much it's going to cost them to move house. And it's in the exact Law Society format. It takes into account all of the various permutations of people moving house, whether they're getting a mortgage, how many of them, whether they're first-time buyers, whether it's a new build property, so many things. That's part of the conveyancing web app. But the other part is we have about 22 case steps for a sale or a purchase or a remortgage. And when something happens, the client gets a text message and they get an email explaining essentially the 5 questions that any client will ask you when they want an update. What's happening? What do you mean by that? Because they don't understand when you first tell them what's happening. What happens next? How long will that take? When will I hear from you again? And that's the 5 things that any client asks a solicitor. So every single notification that I have on my web app must answer those 5 questions or I don't allow it to go live. So people get the answers in bite-sized chunks. They build their knowledge and they make informed decisions. As a solicitor, all our job is to give the client the information for them to make an informed decision. We do not make decisions for them. And I feel that the web app has been instrumental in allowing us to do that. And actually, now that we have our head of content and marketing on board, we're going to be working to actually do more explanation videos rather than just written notifications, because that's obviously where people are more engaging.
No, it's really impressive, and it stands out as like a high street law firm that you're doing that instead of like, the law firms in Belfast.
I think it's the only one. It's certainly the first one which has sort of been designed in-house by a solicitor geek.
Well, that's amazing. And do you think, for your firm, do you think that's transformed how you manage your own client cases?
Yes, absolutely. We always love speaking to our clients. We don't want anyone to think that technology is actually, certainly in our firm, we're not actually putting a barrier up so clients can't get to us. we're just trying to sort of filter out some of the more obvious questions
Yeah,
and
exactly.
information that people need to know. And because we do it at the right time in the process, people assimilate it better because it's in bite-sized chunks. So yes, there's no doubt it actually helps with communicating with clients, but only because we use technology with dealing with people personally, not in substitute for dealing with people personally.
And I think it definitely stands out. Even on your website, I saw that it says we deal with people, not cases, as
Yeah.
your slogan. And so I know that client care is essential to the profession. And how would you build and maintain trust? Do you think the apps helped with that?
How you build and maintain trust? Well, I suppose that's a couple of things. Because we were a new law firm from scratch, we had zero credibility to start with. So any interaction that you have with people builds trust.
Yes.
All we've ever tried to do is be truthful and be consistent and be clear in our advice. And that probably has been certainly sufficient to get us some of the way along. In terms of how we've always been different in how we marketed our law firm because we were new, and therefore we had no hang-ups and we had no sort of baggage from previous owners or previous directors or partners. It was me, I'm the founder, and I'm still the one who comes up along with obviously my head of marketing and socials. You know, we actually sort of formulate the marketing strategy ourselves. I mean, interestingly, one of the ways that we're sort of innovating in building trust and credibility, we actually took a stand at the Love Your Home show in
wow.
March, which I think is the first time a solicitor did that. And we just got out and spoke to people. And essentially we had a big sign saying, we're solicitors, ask us anything. And they absolutely did, including the best one, which was, what's the best way to murder my husband?
Oh dear.
And I'm still not sure whether that was actually facetious or not. But yeah, it was interesting because, again, it's the complacency thing, Taylor. You know, I want to make sure that how we engage with people is continue to be current and modern and actually engaging. So speaking to people at that Love Your Home show who were interested in property and, you know, sort of how their lives were going on and wanting to make their lives better and going to love your food as well. It was interesting to see what their worries were and what their concerns were. And one of the things actually that we heard quite a bit from them, as well as downsizing properties and quite a few first-time buyers that Love Your Home, but we also were talking about wills and probate and enduring powers of attorney. So how to protect themselves in later life, how to protect their assets for their family and their children. And again, that's something where there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think certainly solicitors should be spending a bit more time trying to engage with members of the public and community about later life law, for want of a better expression. How did we end up on a university podcast talking about later life law? But there you go.
World works in mysterious ways. But no, that is amazing. And one of the things that really stands out to me about your firm, Philip, is the social media aspect of it. That is the bit that I just think is amazing. And it makes the law firm stand out compared to other firms. What got you interested in posting to, LinkedIn, your weekly videos, TikTok, Instagram?
Right, that's another long question. Well, I suppose initially because we had to get our message out there. And I think increasingly, where I'd said about historically people went to solicitors in their own community, that's not so much the case now. People from one side of Northern Ireland will travel to the Boucher Road to look at all the furniture stores. So people don't really worry about distance. So increasingly, I wanted to pitch myself as a solicitor, which services all of the people of Northern Ireland. Therefore, the best way to do that is on social media. I've been on LinkedIn for about 10 or 15 years, but in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been posting a video every Friday afternoon, pretty much non-stop. And that has given me a huge amount of authority and credibility and opened doors for me professionally that I literally would never have anticipated in a million years, not just in Northern Ireland, but in England and the rest of the UK as well. And in fact, next week, I am talking at the Property Mark National Conference, Belfast region. And I'm now going to be providing legal services to this national organisation for letting agents in Northern Ireland. And a lot of that has come from my LinkedIn profile.
That's amazing.
But I've always seen LinkedIn as a sort of B2B thing. The B2C thing is obviously, it was Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And yet we always felt that we wanted to do that. And I've seen firms get sort of external social media people in to do stuff, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work for two reasons. Number one, they don't really understand exactly the culture of the firm and what we're trying to project. And secondly, they don't try it long enough. They want immediate results.
Yes.
And the one thing I've learned from LinkedIn is you've got to be knocking away at it for 5 or 6 years before you get any significant
100%.
traction. And you just have to do that.
Yeah.
And again, I'm sure you've followed Gary V, Gary
Oh,
Vaynerchuk.
yes, I've seen him.
And, he was doing YouTube videos for 5 or 6 years with, 20 views. And he just kept banging away until it went right for him. The Instagram thing and the TikTok thing particularly, I felt to do that properly, we needed to take a really innovative step. And that was actually having employed a full-time marketing and content manager. And because Ryan has come to us from another sort of related industry, he sort of understands the property side of things, but he brings a completely different sort of industries, innovations and ideas to the table. But the idea that you want to get information out there is so important. And that's something which I think, we've had some really interesting engagement on TikTok in particular.
Yes,
weirdly.
I can imagine.
And I think one of the things that we've done is we have answered comments and answered questions, and that has actually been really impactful as well. The bottom line is, and I think I said this to you before we started recording, I still tend to search for stuff on Google, or if I'm feeling lazy, YouTube, because I want to be showing exactly how to sort of walk through something. Whereas a lot of people now seem to be looking and searching on TikTok.
Yes.
So when you look at rent rises in Northern Ireland, when you look at electrical inspections and carbon monoxide detectors and things like that in the private rented sector, TikTok seemed to be the place to go. And certainly the analytics seem to show that. I think for us, it was a bold step to take on a full-time social media person, because I don't think any other law firms have specifically done that. A, we got the right person, but B, I think it's the way you absolutely have to do it. If you're serious about growing your business, and I see myself as a businessman first,
yes,
and a solicitor second, and actually just going full circle to the whole thing about high street law firms, you see on social media, and even in Northern Ireland, people say that they're an entrepreneur and all this sort of stuff. I don't think you ever call yourself an entrepreneur. But the fact of the matter is, if you have entrepreneurial zeal, if you are an undergrad or a postgrad and you actually want to run a business, you can absolutely do that in a high street law firm. It is a business first and foremost. So I don't want anyone to think that they can't run a business if they're a lawyer. You absolutely have to run a business. And I think hopefully I've shown that you can innovate in how you do that.
No, I think that's really great advice. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, do you think having these social media accounts, do you think that's actually increased your client intake for the firm?
Gosh, giving away trade secrets here.
Sorry.
Do you know what? Yes, it has. Because, and again, one of the things is we're in a sort of the start of the journey of that. Ryan came to us as our head of socials in October last year. And we've always said we need at least a year to be able to gauge properly how we're doing. I think we're ahead of schedule. We have already had phone calls saying, I saw your stuff on TikTok. Can you answer me this question? Whether that's landlords, whether it's tenants, whether it's property investors, whether it's wills. We've also had some people who want to have protection from harassment and domestic abuse. And they've come to us through social media as well. So yes, it has absolutely helped us to grow our business. And again, because our business started from scratch and we had no sort of pedigree, for want of a better expression, I feel we are probably less restricted in how we can go about that. But yeah, absolutely, socials has helped our business.
And how do you manage all that? I mean, you're managing a business, you're giving legal advice to your clients, then you're on TikTok, and then you're at conferences. I feel like it's a lot of work for one person. You're obviously very dedicated.
Yeah. It's not a 9-to-5 job. I think for most solicitors in private practice, it's not a 9-to-5 job. If you're a business owner in private practice, then it's increasingly not a 9-to-5 job. For me to have built my law firm, I have sacrificed things. I've sacrificed family time. I've sacrificed hobbies, the Titanic being one. I I'm not as involved in the Titanic stuff as I should have been. So yes, I've had to give a lot more time. I'm still working at the age of 50 at actually managing my time better. I do less day-to-day conveyancing because we have a conveyancing department which has awesome conveyancers in it who do a lot of the heavy lifting for me. But a lot of my time now is involved with the Law Society. Being chair of Conveyancing and Property Committee means that I'm sort of at a high level, seeing which direction the conveyancing profession is going in. We are taking soundings from members of the conveyancing profession across Northern Ireland. If they have issues, then we are investigating those issues. As the Law Society, they can make representations on behalf of the Northern Ireland legal profession. If we're talking to mortgage lenders, if we're talking to Department for Communities, various stakeholders. I'll be honest, I'm not the best organised person, as Ryan will probably attest to.
I find that hard to believe.
Really?
Yes, with all the work you've got going on.
I do you know what? I have brilliant people around me. And
so it's a
to be
teamwork.
fair, I have brilliant people around me who accommodate me and accommodate the fact that I'm not always where I should be when I say that I'm supposed to be there. And actually, one question people ask is, how on earth do you work with your wife? I think the question is probably better, how on earth does she work with me? But because we actually met in a law firm, our entire lives have been law together. So yeah, we run the law firm together.
That's amazing. So Philip, for law students or young lawyers considering a career in property law or starting their own practice, what advice would you give to them to help them stand out and succeed in today's legal landscape?
That's a great question. For people who want a career in conveyancing and the property side of things, I can say that there is no better feeling than the delight that you hear in a client's voice when you ring them up to say that they can pick up their keys from the estate agent. And that never gets old. And if you want to hear that and get that level of satisfaction out of your job, then definitely conveyancing is the place for you. In terms of how you make yourself stand out, I think that one of the most important things is, and maybe this is slightly different from our firm, but you have to be proud of who your generation is, and you have to actually bring the skills that your generation has that my generation maybe struggles with. It is ridiculous that more law firms aren't doing stuff on social media. It's insane, because they have plenty of young solicitors and young members of staff there.
Yes.
But either they don't feel confident enough to put their skill set forward, or they're not actually being encouraged to do so. But I think it's really important to make yourself stand out, show what added value you can bring, other than the fact that you're really clever and you've got a law degree. What else can you bring to the table? And actually, in Northern Ireland, more than anywhere else in the UK, people do business with people. So if you have personality and you bring personality and skill sets to the table, you're absolutely a perfect match for a high street law firm.
It's perfect. And last but not least, I just wanted to ask you, where do you see Armstrong Solicitors heading over the next few years? Do you think there's any big changes, such as artificial intelligence, integrating into the high street law firms?
That's a very difficult question. In terms of Armstrong Solicitors, I personally have a 5-year plan, and Armstrong Solicitors has a 5-year plan.
Wow.
To some extent, building the social media side of things, part of our business expansion and development is going to be how our social media and our marketing develops. We're going to continue to innovate. We're going to still be the same consistent, excellent legal advice, but we're going to look at how we present that. We're going to do more videos other than written stuff. And as I say, we're going to innovate in marketing. In terms of AI, that's an interesting question. And it's very difficult to say that at the moment, because a lot of the stuff that is being forced down our throats from AI at the moment are people wanting to sell us AI software that we don't want. And I think that actually creates a barrier between us and our client. I think the clever AI will automate some of the stuff that we need to do to give us more time with our client. So I think the law firm which actually gets that right will be the law firm that actually succeeds in the future. And that's what I'm hoping that we can do.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Philip.
It's been my absolute pleasure, Taylor.
It's been so inspiring listening to your law firm, and all the best of luck with the rest.
Thank you, and for you as well.
Thank you.